while I think we have a great structure right now today, I definitely think that will change. Like, I think we'll change it probably in the next 6 months because, as I said, there is no real playbook for what it is that we're doing. We're trying to do things very differently.
I'm very excited, Alice, to have you. I feel like I've been listening to every podcast you put out, every video that you put out. By now, I feel like I know a lot about the work that you do, but there's still a lot of things that I'm curious about. And also there are a lot of things that I admire. So we're going to cover a lot of the education aspect of your marketing. And we're also going to cover a little bit about your journey as a marketer. And I know that you just wrote a book about it. How was that process?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And the book was interesting. I think it was really nice in a way, kind of 4 years into my journey at Cognism, to look back over everything that we've built and all of the change that's happened. And going through that process was actually really beneficial as well, just to kind of take stock of where we've come and looking back on it all. So it was exciting to do. I'm very glad that it's out in the world now.
What got you started in the first place? What got you started into marketing?
So originally, my background from marketing perspective is I had worked in sort of news and journalism outlets. And that was because I thought I did a degree in international relations and politics. And I came out of university thinking I'd love to be a journalist. And so got a role as a marketer and thought, well, I can just sort of get my foot in the door doing marketing and then I'll sort of progress into journalism. However, I realized like very early on that I loved doing the marketing piece and all of the creativity that came with that, which I also realized was very important for me as a marketer to be interested in what it was that I was marketing. I realized that maybe journalism wasn't where I wanted to pursue my career, but to stick with the marketing side of it. So I went from there into Thomson Reuters, but the Reuters side, so obviously much larger organization. And then from that, I went on to the tech, sort of legal tech, and then onto marketing and sales tech and SaaS, and fell in love with sort of scale up and startups.
What do you think were your the two skill sets that made you successful in climbing the marketing ladder?
I think one thing that definitely has always come out of, I think most of the roles I've had have been through recommendations, and people who have recommended me into the roles has always been because of my sort of bias for action. And this is definitely a quality that I look for in everyone that I hire into my team as well, because I think it's so important. But you can sort of underestimate how vital it is to be able to take something from an idea to actually being like live in the world, adding value, and being able to do that quite quickly as well and not blocking yourself. And I think that bias to action that sort of is within me has definitely enabled me to progress, because it just means that I'm consistently always delivering things. I think the fact that I'm just getting through a lot of volume has always helped me, enabled me to progress.
So it's bias to action and speed to deliver.
Yeah, I think that those would be two things. And also just not afraid of change, and actually embracing that and being very comfortable taking on something new that I've never done before, creating my own playbook, whether that be commercial hire number one into a tech startup and building something from scratch, or shifting our whole marketing approach from something that is pretty well trodden to something where there is no playbook, this sort of demand gen motion that we're doing today. And I think, again, being comfortable to take those, I suppose you could say, risks or chances, and being comfortable that you're able to execute on them yourself, I think has also been very helpful.
It's a great skill to be adaptable, especially these days where everything changes from week to week almost. Yeah. I'm curious, what are some emotions that are currently working well for you this quarter?
I think probably our biggest thing is this whole idea of a media machine that we've been building. And I think that this quarter, what it has shown us is that we've been able to overlay onto that media machine a bit more focus using this easy mode content framework, which if people don't know what it is, Todd and Abade are two amazing content creators. And we've been working on this whole framework, which they call easy mode, which is a way for us to have a very clear strategy, narrative, points of views around all of the content that we're building and then delivering through our media machine. Because what we had been very good at Cognism, and glad that you were sort of alluding to that earlier, is that we were delivering a lot of educational content, but it could be quite random. it would just be kind of what we felt would be useful today, and it kind of depended on someone coming up with that idea and then having that continued motion to like ideate. And we didn't have a very clear structure around it. And this has really unlocked for us a scalable way for us to continue to build that educational content with a very clear narrative and clear points of views, and to see how that sort of falls out within the media machine. And I think really hitting on that predictability for it this quarter has been massive. We've seen huge uptakes in all of our subscriber channels because of that, I believe. So I would say that's been a really big unlock for us.
I'm curious if you also put ad spend around the educational content that you use. That's a lot less intent based, and it's a lot more more of a display ad type. How do you think about advertising that type of content?
So we run an always on, all the time, to everyone, ungated, friction-free approach. So what does that mean? Basically, we have 4 buckets of content that we will run through our paid motions. And those buckets are thought leadership. Now, thought leadership bucket for us is stuff that we talk about that's relevant to our audience, but has absolutely no tie back to the product or offering. And then we have our content bucket, which is topics which do have a dotted line into what Cognism does, but they're much more actionable. So that's a lot of the stuff that we talk about, where it's the shift from lead generation to demand generation. That would be a really good example of a content topic, and it would be us providing very practical resources, templates, guides, etc., for people to access around that. And then we have our social proof bucket, which is basically what it says on the tin, but we try to get very creative with how we showcase the Cognism product and service, and how our customers also talk about it. And we do all of that through the social proof bucket. And then finally, our product bucket. And this is one which is actually really, really important. I think sometimes gets forgotten when you run this more ungated demand gen play. And this is where we spent a lot of our time focusing on. And it's all of the content around what it is that Cognism actually does and how it serves our personas. This is things like us creating like ungated product tours, workflows, all sorts of creative ways to kind of showcase the value that Cognism can bring. So that's how we think about educational content. We think about which of those buckets does it fall into? And all of those buckets are being promoted all the time to our audiences through our paid channels. Each of them will have different objectives set up depending on the type of content that we're running, like whether it be video, if it's document ad, it would be different, etc., etc.
I'm curious how you think about even a document, for instance, that you call them the dotted line actionable templates, as an example in that particular bucket. How do you know if what you've written is helpful to your audience? Obviously, you look at if they read the full article and so forth, but what are the insights to knowing that it's been helpful?
The main things that we look at are, again, we benchmark everything against like the performance of other content within the bucket and then the performance over time. So we're able to see if that's like trending upwards, in line with, or below. And you need to create your own benchmarks for your own organization. I think that's really important. But it also then, because it gives you a point of reference, like how is this doing in comparison to other things that we put out there? And we'll have Google Data Studio dashboards, which can show us like, these are the top performing pieces of content for time on page, lowest bounce rate, and also website journey started, which I think is really important. So a lot of our emphasis, especially with that thought leadership based content, is to start a website journey, to start an educational journey, like within Cognism's website, so that people are going and engaging and finding out more. It doesn't matter if that doesn't lead to a conversion in that window of time, but we want to know that we're starting journeys. That's also something that we really look for. And then we do look at assisted conversions, and then also just direct conversions, depending on the piece of content. That will probably be less likely or more likely. And then we just, again, like I say, benchmark all of that within its own bucket. We also use a tool called Smart Octo, which is traditionally more of a journalist kind of analytics tool. And that can tell us things like if that content has had a lot of net new engagement. So we've been able to create new people coming in to consume that content.
That's super interesting. So that's how you measure if somebody has started a journey with you with Smart Octo, the net new engagements.
yeah, we can measure all of that through Smart Octo, the really, really clever tool and useful tool for people who are thinking about trying to take on this more, journalistic focus to content and are serious about it rather than more traditional kind of blog-based Google Analytics measurements.
So in the media machine bucket, you have your team that's creating these resources that have educational value. How do you look at their individual goals? Do you look at it as from an output perspective? Do you do output plus quality? Do you do a pipeline objective? How do you set up their OKRs, both at the team level and at the individual level?
So how it works is in our demand gen org, so this media machine sits in the demand gen org, and they operate in pods. So we have a pod for each of our core personas, so marketing, sales, and then ops. And their key objectives really mirror the objectives of like the organization and then the objectives that I've been given from the CEO as well. So number one thing is we'll have a revenue number and a pipeline goal we have to hit. But then on top of that, the two key like OKRs for us this year are to increase the percentage of that revenue and pipeline that's coming from the best types of customers, which is defined as growth plus organizations, and also to increase our retention. So basically to get healthier CAC to LTV.
And then they trickle it down to individual articles that they need to write, and then they trickle it down to exactly how the volume and the volume of articles and the engagement metrics for them.
Exactly, yeah. And that's so the plan then goes, so it starts with the deck, which is how do we increase the number of Growth Plus accounts engaging with our value loop, and then from there, but also hitting pipeline revenue. And from there, it will be a whole set of planning items against each of the parts of the media machine for how they were going to activate that within it, which is a lot of output-based goals. And then we're tracking that at the end of every month. We have what we call like a DG report, which looks to see how we're progressing against all of that. And that will happen across each of the pods as well.
So I'm going to take one of your team members so that I can understand a little bit more clearly. So let's say that they're in the RevOps pod and they're an individual contributor that needs to create valuable content. How do they go about that? I imagine that first of all, it's hard to get into the shoes of a RevOps since it's such a specific job description.
We always work with a subject matter expert. That's like one of the core principles of all of our content. So nothing will ever be created or driven unless it's like been validated or enabled through a subject matter expert. That's like vital to everything that we do. And that's how we keep the quality really high. So they'll have access to a subject matter expert they'll be able to utilize them in order to validate their ideas and help them output all of the content that they produce. They'll run a winter survey test. So we use winter very heavily, where they're able to engage with that whole segment. So they can just get a whole load of operations professionals and they can ask them a whole lot of host of questions around what it is that the types of content they want to see, what they find most valuable. And then they'll also do a lot of Gong discovery calls. So they'll be joining calls with current customers. They'll be listening to prospect calls and they'll spend a lot of time on Gong setting up alerts as well.
If you were to start from scratch again and you have to do it all over again, what would be the ideal marketing structure for you?
I think it's a really interesting question. And my honest answer on this is that I actually train my team to be really open to change. And while I think we have a great structure right now today, I definitely think that will change. I think we'll change it probably in the next 6 months because, as I said, there is no real playbook for what it is that we're doing. We're trying to do things very differently. And so you need to be very critical and you need to be open to acknowledging where things are working, where things aren't, and changing that in order to do better, basically. So I think things that I really, really like and I would hope would stay true are having content person sit within the demand gen pod or function. I think that's really, really important. That's really enabled us to, I guess, look at content in a whole different way. I think traditionally, this content role has been a mixture of SEO, blog writing, maybe a little bit of video script writing potentially. But when you look at the candidates and the people who are doing those roles, they're very, I guess they're probably more like desk-based research and that type of thing, as opposed to like wholly knowing your persona, being able to turn your hand to writing a video script, briefing a subject matter expert, running a podcast, all of these types of content in all of its multiple formats, creating an ad or writing copy for a landing page, which you really need to be able to do today. So I think that has been a real unlock, having that sit within the demand gen team. And I wouldn't really change that, I hope, going forward. I think we finally found a really great way for that to work. Similarly, I really like having paid sit separately and be basically like an agency for the demand gen function, and having real experts sit within that organization, because I think it's just so key. And especially at the scale in which we're running things, we need like that daily focus on all of our channels and our paid activities. And I would also want to maintain the separation with that content SEO team, which I spoke about, and having them sit separately, because work that they're doing is very focused on capturing demand and all of that high intent SEO piece that we're looking at. And again, it's very technical, it's very specific, they need to be focused, it's very different to the other content that we're producing. So yeah, I think those are things that I really like and I would hope to keep, but I'm also very open always to changing things.
I'm always concerned that I'm an optimizer at heart, and that is a bit stressful for a marketing team. But you seem to have nailed it and managed to equip your team to handle that kind of change. How do you train that, or do you just hire for it?
Yeah, I think it's hiring and being very transparent about it throughout like every interaction really with people. And then you kind of becomes a part of your DNA. There's a lot of parts of the Cognism marketing team DNA, which I'm like really, really strong on, that action bias piece that I spoke about. But also I will interview for being able to cope with change, and like not finding that to be stressful, and not finding that to be something that will intimidate them or block them from being able to achieve like their work goals.
You started putting the chili piper as part of your workflow. I'm curious how you went about the purchase decision, and how was the implementation and the output that you got from it as well.
Yeah, so it's been really, so far, so good, in that we've basically increased our qualified pipeline by about 50% as a result of implementing the chili piper direct to AE and direct to MDR routing. I think our biggest barrier with it was getting buy-in from sales, basically. That was the biggest thing. Like we know that like the way that buyers want to buy and how they want to go through the process has definitely changed. And the more that we can remove friction from that, the better. And this was definitely like a key part of where we felt like we had a broken leaky bucket and funnel.
Who is inspiring to you in marketing right now?
Yeah, well, I guess I always have to say Refine Labs is like probably my biggest source of inspiration. I think that was the reason for my mentality shift and the whole shift away from lead gen. And it's not just Chris Walker. I actually think there's a lot of like the team there, who Sydney and Ashley and Mo, who do some amazing content on LinkedIn. If you follow them, like quite a bit more actionable kind of stuff. But I think anyone from Refine Labs or any of their sort of resources, we are customers of the Vault, which is also an amazing resource if you want to be building this whole new playbook around how to do demand gen. And like they're building it with their customers as well as we're building it ourselves too. So yeah, I would say they would probably be number one.
Okay, I'm happy to hear, and I'm happy that we got the time to talk. I feel like we could spend hours in geeking out about all the things that you're doing.
Well, yeah, it's lovely to speak, and yeah, let me know if you need anything. But thank you.